My name is Paige Tanner. I'm 34, and I found out what my family really thought of me from a hospital bed. 6 weeks earlier, I had given birth to a daughter, Nora. Then a truck ran a red light on Colfax while I was driving home from a late shift, and I woke up with 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a cast on my right arm. My husband Daniel was in Seattle, 6 hours from getting home. Someone had to care for my newborn that night, and my mother lived 20 minutes from the hospital. She said no. She told Daniel one sentence, and that sentence is the reason you're here. Your sister never has these emergencies. My sister was on a Caribbean cruise. My mother was sitting at a casino. What I did from that bed in the next 3 minutes ended 9 years and $486,000, and that isn't even the part that broke them. The part that broke them walked through the door 3 hours later, an old man carrying a worn folder, and he said something none of them ever expected to hear out loud. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, the channel where quiet people finally close the account. If someone in your life has ever treated your steadiness as a blank check, this story is for you. Drop a comment and tell me who actually showed up when you fell, and be sure to subscribe. I want to tell you about the phone call, because that's where it starts. I came up out of the anesthesia in a curtained bay in the ER, and the first thing I felt was the cast, heavy and foreign, on my right arm, and the plastic ID band cinched around my left wrist. A nurse was saying my name like she'd said it a few times already. My ribs felt like someone had parked a sedan on my chest. Daniel was on speaker on the pillow beside my head, and his voice was doing that flat, careful thing it does when he's scared and trying not to sound scared. Paige, the sitter can't stay past 11. I called your mom. I knew before he said it. She won't come. There was a pause, and behind his words I could hear it. Faint and unmistakable. The electronic chime and chatter of a slot floor. The little fanfare a machine plays when it pays out. My mother was at Black Hawk with her girlfriends. She'd told Daniel she couldn't drive over because she had to cat sit while my sister Megan was on a cruise. A cat. My 6-week-old daughter needed somebody for the night, and the answer was a cat. I didn't cry. I want you to understand that part, because everyone expects the woman in the hospital bed to fall apart, and I didn't. I looked at the band on my wrist. Then I reached over with my left hand and pulled my phone off the tray table. I had a great deal to take care of, and I was very good at taking care of things. That was always the problem. You should know who I was before that night, because it explains why my family treated me the way a faucet treats a glass. I grew up in a rented duplex in Aurora, where the heat worked when it felt like it. I paid for community college by working the closing shift at a grocery store, transferred on scholarship, and clawed my way into a finance program nobody in my family understood. By 30, I was a senior financial analyst at a Fortune 500 company downtown, the person they put in the room when the numbers had to be right. I read spreadsheets for a living. Numbers don't have favorites, and they don't lie to your face, which is more than I could say for some people. Daniel and I married at 26 and decided to wait on kids, partly because we wanted to, and partly because there was always something the family needed first. We lived below our means in a quiet way that nobody noticed. 2 incomes, 1 used car, no debt. That's the only reason what I'm about to tell you was even possible. For 9 years I had been sending my parents $4,500 a month. I never said the number out loud. Not to my husband, not to my sister, not to a soul. I told myself it was for my father's heart condition and the mortgage. I told myself I was the only one steady enough to carry it, and being the steady one had become its own kind of identity. I'm telling you this now so you understand. I wasn't naive. I was responsible to the point of self-erasure. There is a difference, and that night I finally learned it. The first thing I did was not revenge. The first thing I did was solve the actual problem, because that's what I do. With my left thumb, I pulled up the number for a licensed overnight care agency Daniel and I had vetted before Nora was born and never ended up using. A woman answered on the second ring. I told her my name, my situation, and my address in 9 sentences, calm as a Tuesday. I need a night nurse for a 6-week-old tonight, starting now. She asked if the baby was medically stable. She's perfect. I'm the one in the hospital. 40 minutes later, a nurse named Yvette let herself into my house with the code Daniel gave her, washed her hands, and texted me a photo of Nora asleep with her fist against her cheek. I looked at that photo for a long time. The ER nurse beside me watched me set the phone down and asked, gently, if I had family who could come. It's handled, I said. Next. She blinked. People always blink when you don't perform the breakdown they're braced for. I wasn't being cold. I was triaging, the way you do when you've spent your whole life being the only adult in a room full of adults. My daughter was safe and warm and watched. My husband was in the air. My ribs would knit. There was exactly one item left on the list that night, one I had carried for 9 years and never once allowed myself to touch, and now my left hand was free, and my mind was very, very clear. I opened my banking app. The login screen glowed in the dark bay like a small cold moon. Inside the app there's a screen called Recurring Transfers, and I had 4 of them. I knew them by heart the way you know a scar. The first was labeled Mom and Dad, $2,000 a month. The second said Home, $1,100, for the mortgage I believed I was helping with. The third said Dad Medical, $900. The fourth just said Megan Support, $500, $4,500, on the first of every month, for 108 months. I had set the first one up at 25, the night my father called me sobbing about a hospital bill, and I had never let myself add up the total because the total felt like a door I couldn't walk back through. So I made myself look. The app did the math without flinching. $486,000. Almost $500,000, gone out of my life one quiet automated payment at a time, while my mother told the relatives we manage on our own. I pressed cancel on the first transfer. A green check appeared and a line of text I will remember until I die. Recurring transfer canceled. I pressed the second. Recurring transfer canceled. The third. The fourth. 4 taps, maybe 20 seconds, and 9 years simply stopped, the way a faucet stops. I felt no triumph and no grief, just a strange flat clarity, like the moment a spreadsheet finally balances. Then, as I was closing the app, my eye snagged on something in the transaction history I'd never scrolled to before. A single line item buried under the Dad Medical label from 2 years back. It read, Loan, M, $40,000. My sister's initial. Not my father's surgery. Megan. I locked the phone and lay there in the dark listening to the monitor count my heartbeats, and I made myself sit with the question I'd avoided for 9 years. Why had I done it? The easy answer, the one strangers offer, is that I was a pushover desperate for love. That answer is wrong, and if you've ever been the dependable one, you already know why. I did it because somewhere along the way, I had decided that being needed was the same as being safe. If I was the load-bearing wall, no one could remove me. My grandmother understood that about me before I did. Her name was Ruth, my mother's mother, a tall, flinty woman who smelled like coffee and machine oil and never once raised her voice to get a room's attention. The year before she died, she took my hand at Thanksgiving and said, "Somebody has to watch this family's money, and your mother won't. So it'll have to be you." I thought she meant be generous. I think now she meant something closer to be vigilant. Ruth passed last spring quietly, in her sleep, and I had been too buried in a new pregnancy and a demanding quarter to ask what she'd left or to whom. I assumed my mother had handled it, the way I assumed my money was buying my father's medicine. I had spent a lifetime assuming the best about people who had never once earned it, and calling that assumption love. Lying in that bed, with my daughter 40 minutes away in a stranger's careful hands, I finally understood that I had been funding a story about my family, not the actual family. The actual family had just chosen a cat. Daniel called again from his layover, and this time he told me everything my mother had said, word for word, because he knew I would want it word for word. He had called her at 9, explained that I was in surgery and the baby needed someone, and asked her to please just drive the 20 minutes. She had sighed, he said, the long theatrical sigh she uses, and told him she really couldn't. Megan was finally getting her dream vacation, and someone had to watch the cat. And besides, Paige always lands on her feet. Then she'd said the line, "Your sister never has these emergencies." As if the truck that hit me had checked my family rank first. As if my daughter's first night without her mother could wait until a cruise was over. Daniel's voice cracked telling me, and I told him to breathe, that Nora was fine, that I was fine, that he should get on his plane. After we hung up, I opened Instagram, which I almost never do, and there was Megan's story at the top. A glistening reel of a turquoise pool deck and a coconut drink, and a caption that said, "Living my best life, finally." My sister, 29, an aspiring influencer with 11,000 followers and a $500 monthly allowance she thought came from the universe. I didn't comment. I didn't scream into the dark. Instead, I opened my messages and typed 3 words to a contact I almost never used, a contact saved simply as Grandpa H. I wrote, "We should talk." The 3 dots appeared almost immediately, like he'd been waiting 9 years for that exact text. And maybe he had. I expected Grandpa Harold to write back. Instead, my phone lit up with a FaceTime from the middle of the Caribbean Sea, and it was Megan. I answered with my left hand and my face half in shadow, and she didn't notice the hospital ceiling behind me, didn't notice the cast, didn't ask why I was lying down at midnight. "Paige, finally," she said, holding the phone too close so I got a tour of her sunburned nose. "My card got declined at the spa. Like, humiliating." I waited. She filled the silence the way she always does. "Mom said the family account always covers me. Did you touch something?" And there it was. The whole architecture of the lie in one sentence. The family account. My sister genuinely believed the $500 a month appeared from some communal Reynolds treasury, a magic well her mother managed. She had no idea it came from me, because my mother had spent 9 years making sure she didn't. I asked her evenly if she knew I'd been in an accident. "Wait, what? Are you being dramatic right now?" Behind her, a steel drum band started playing. "Can you just fix the card? We dock in Cozumel tomorrow and I have a shoot." A shoot. I told her I'd look into it, which was true, and that I had to go, which was also true. I hung up before she could answer and lay in the dark with the steel drums still ringing in my ears. My sister wasn't cruel. Not exactly. She was something almost worse. She was a person who had never once been asked to imagine that the well had a bottom, because no one had ever let her see who was carrying the bucket. The next morning they moved me to a regular room, and that's when the family group text started buzzing on the tray table. I was on a chain called Reynolds Family with a dozen relatives in it, mostly silent, mostly aunts. I rarely opened it, but the screen kept flashing, and against my better judgment I tapped in. My mother had been busy. She had posted an hour earlier a long message that began, "I'm heartbroken to say Paige is being dramatic again, and has cut her struggling parents off out of spite." She wrote that my father's health was fragile, that they had given me everything, that she didn't know how she'd cover his medicine now. She added, for the audience, "We've always managed on our own, but this is cruel." There it was again. The same screen glowing with the same lie. Except this time it wasn't my bank app. It was a stage. "We manage on our own." The woman had said that sentence to relatives for 9 years while cashing my transfers on the 1st of every month. My Aunt Carol had already replied with 3 broken heart emojis and the words, "Shame on her, kicking a sick man when he's down." A cousin sent a praying hands. Nobody in that chat knew the truth, because the truth had never been allowed in the room. I held the phone and felt the old reflex rise, the urge to explain myself, to soften it, to manage everyone's feelings the way I'd managed everything else. I set the phone face down instead. Explaining was the old me. The new me, the one the truck had apparently installed, wanted something colder and more precise. The new me wanted the numbers in the room. And I knew exactly where to find them. Daniel walked into my hospital room at 11 the next morning, unshaven, gray with exhaustion, carrying Nora in her car seat and a diaper bag over one shoulder. He'd flown straight to the house, relieved Yvette, and driven the baby to me. He set the car seat on the bed and just looked at me, at the cast and the bruising along my jaw, and his eyes filled. I told him not to, because if he started I would, and I had work to do. He lifted Nora out and laid her on my chest, mindful of the ribs, and for a minute the three of us just breathed together, which is the only part of that week I'd live again. Then my phone rang, and it was my father. Roy Reynolds, 64, the man whose heart I'd been funding for 9 years. His voice was thin and shaking. "Paigey," he said, using the name he hadn't used since I was small. "I didn't know it got this bad. The money, the accident. I didn't know." For one suspended second I believed he might do it. Might finally stand up in his own house. "I never wanted you carrying all of it," he said, and I heard him take a breath like a man about to step off a ledge. Then, behind him, I heard my mother's voice, sharp and low, asking who he was talking to. The line went muffled, a hand over the speaker. When he came back his voice had changed, flattened, retreated. "I should go. Feel better." And he hung up. That was my father, in one phone call. A good man who had spent 40 years learning that the safest thing to do in that house was nothing at all. That afternoon Daniel brought me my laptop, propped it on the rolling table, and I did the one thing in the world that has never failed to steady my hands. I built a spreadsheet. With my left hand and a lot of patience I logged into my bank, exported 9 years of statements, and dropped them into a pivot table. This is what I do for a company worth billions. I can certainly do it for my own life. I sorted the $486,000 by where it actually landed, and the picture that assembled itself, cell by cell, was not the picture my mother had painted for the relatives. The mortgage payments I thought I was covering had been made 10 times in 9 years, not 108. My father's documented medical expenses, the real ones, the cardiologist and the prescriptions, came to about $65,000 across the whole period. So where had the other $421,000 gone? I filtered by withdrawal location and date, and a cluster lit up like a rash. Cash withdrawals, hundreds of them, almost all within a 2-mile radius of one zip code. I pulled up a map. The zip code was Black Hawk. My mother hadn't been visiting a casino that one unlucky night she skipped her granddaughter. My mother had been visiting that casino for the better part of a decade, on my dime, while telling a dozen relatives she managed on her own. And a second, smaller stream branched off and ran somewhere else entirely, steady and deliberate, year after year. I followed it. It led to Megan. I sat back as far as the ribs allowed and let the numbers say it, because numbers, unlike my family, have never once lied to me. I'm going to give you the exact numbers because I want you holding them the way I held them, because everything after this turns on them. Out of $486,000, $65,000 could be matched to my father's real medical care. $11,000 had touched the mortgage. That left roughly $410,000 unaccounted for, and it split into 2 rivers. The first river, about $290,000 over 9 years, was cash, pulled in small, dignified amounts near Black Hawk, so no single withdrawal would ever look like a problem. The second river ran to my sister, around $120,000, including that $40,000 line-marked loan, M, that had been filed under my father's surgery to hide it inside the only category nobody questioned. A loan she'd never been asked to repay, for a sum that, it turned out, had funded a year of brand building, a leased SUV, and a photographer in Tulum. I printed the summary to a single page on the unit's bedside printer, one clean sheet, the whole 9 years in 12 rows. Then Daniel showed me one more thing. He'd been scrolling the relatives' chat and screenshotted a message my mother had sent Aunt Carol months ago, before any of this, where she bragged, "We covered Megan's brand shoot ourselves. That's what good parents do. We covered it ourselves." I looked at that screenshot, and I looked at my one printed page, and something in me went very quiet and very level. I wasn't going to send an angry text. I wasn't going to explain or defend. I was going to let the paper into the room, in front of the same audience my mother had spent 9 years performing for, and then I was going to walk out and never fund the show again. "It's handled," I said to Daniel, and for the first time the words felt less like triage and more like a verdict. I want to stop here for 1 second, because if you've made it this far, you might be the person I'm about to describe. I spent 9 years believing I was paying for my father's heart, and I was actually paying for a slot machine and a brand shoot. If you've ever wired money on faith, pull one statement tonight, just one, and read it like it isn't yours. If this is hitting close to home, subscribe, because the next part is where my grandfather walks through that hospital door, and what he said on the bed changed everything I thought I knew about my mother. My mother discovered the transfers had stopped the way she discovered everything, when it cost her. The first of the month came, no deposit landed, and by noon my phone was ringing with her name on the screen. I let it go twice. The third time I answered, because avoidance was the old me. Her voice came through warm as fresh pie, the voice she uses on relatives and waiters. Honey, are you okay? We've been worried sick about you and that baby. Worried sick. The woman who chose a cat. I said I was recovering, thank you. There was a pause while she repositioned, and then the warmth curdled by degrees into something I'd been hearing my whole life. I noticed the account didn't come through. Is that a mix-up with the bank? I told her it wasn't a mix-up. Silence. Then the guilt, right on schedule. After everything your father and I did for you, we took you to every practice, we kept a roof over your head. I let her run. She circled back, the way she always does, to the one weapon that had never failed her. And she said it again, softer now, almost wounded, as if I were the one being unreasonable. You know your sister never has these emergencies. And there it was, the third time I'd heard that sentence in 3 days, except this time I didn't flinch, and I didn't explain. I simply said, I know, Mom, and let the words mean something she didn't intend. Megan never had emergencies because Megan had me, and now Megan had a declined card and a leased SUV she couldn't afford. I told my mother I had to feed the baby, and I hung up while she was still talking, which I had never once done in 34 years. When the mother fails, she sends the aunt. That afternoon, Aunt Carol texted me directly, which she'd done maybe twice in my adult life, both times to ask for money for a raffle. Her message was a paragraph of borrowed outrage. I am disgusted. Your parents are barely getting by and you cut them off while your father is sick? Your grandmother would be ashamed of you. Family takes care of family. I read it twice, and the line about my grandmother almost got me, because Ruth was the one person in that family I'd never wanted to disappoint. Then I remembered Ruth's actual words. Somebody has to watch this family's money, and your mother won't. And I understood Carol had it exactly backwards. So I didn't write a paragraph back. I didn't defend myself or cry or apologize. I attached the single page, the one with 12 rows and 9 years on it, and I typed one sentence beneath it. Here's where the money your sister-in-law says she manages on her own actually went. The Black Hawk withdrawals are hers. Ask her. Then I put the phone down and changed Nora's diaper. One-handed, with a calm I hadn't felt in a decade. The phone buzzed once, the little ellipsis of Carol typing. Then it stopped. Then nothing. No reply came. Not that hour. Not that day. I imagined her sitting in her kitchen reading 12 rows of numbers she couldn't argue with, because that's the thing about a spreadsheet. You can call a person dramatic, but you cannot call a column of withdrawals dramatic. It simply sits there, being true. I had spent my life managing this family's feelings. It had never once occurred to me that the kindest, hardest thing I could do was hand them a fact and let them sit with it alone. My mother is many things, but she is never out of moves. When the warmth failed and the aunt failed, she reached for the one stage she controls completely. She called a family dinner. The invitation came as a group text to the whole Reynolds chain, framed in her best wounded matriarch register. Let's all gather Sunday to welcome baby Nora and clear the air as a family. Paige, I hope you'll come and we can put this misunderstanding behind us. A misunderstanding. 5 days after she chose a cat over my newborn, it was a misunderstanding. Daniel read it over my shoulder and said, Lo, you don't have to go. We can stay home with Nora and let them sit in it. And he was right. I didn't have to go. But I knew what Sunday was actually for. It wasn't to welcome my daughter. It was to get me in a room full of relatives and pressure me into turning the money back on, to perform reconciliation until I caved the way I always caved. She wanted an audience for my surrender. So I decided to give her the audience, just not the surrender. I texted back 2 words. Will come. And felt the trap close around the trapper. Then I made one more call to Grandpa H, and we talked for 40 minutes, and at the end of it he asked me a single question in his dry gravel voice. You want it quiet, or you want it true? I looked at Nora asleep in the crook of my good arm, at the little life I'd nearly missed, funding a lie. True, I said. Then I'll bring the folder, he said. I didn't ask what was in it. Some part of me already knew it would be the thing that ended this for good. I have to back up a few hours, to the part the title promised you, because it happened before the dinner, and it's the hinge. The whole story swings on. 3 hours after I canceled those transfers, the night of the accident, while Daniel was still in the air, my hospital room door opened slowly and my grandfather walked in. Harold, 78, my mother's father, in a pressed flannel shirt buttoned to the throat, moving carefully with a cane he clearly resented. I hadn't told him which hospital. He'd called the only 2 in the area until he found me. Under his free arm he carried a thick manila folder, soft and furred at the corners from age, bound with 2 crossed rubber bands gone brittle and pale. He set it on the foot of my bed like a man setting down something heavy he'd carried a long way, and he looked at me, at the cast and the bruises, and his jaw worked. Your mother said you'd had a fender bender, he said. I drove past 3 exits before I believed her. Then he sat in the vinyl chair, folded his spotted hands over the head of the cane, and said the thing I will hear in my head for the rest of my life. I knew. I always knew. I asked him what he knew. He looked at the folder, not at me. About the money, all 9 years of it, about where your mother's been spending her afternoons, about what she told this family while you bled yourself dry. He tapped the folder once. Not tonight, though. You've got enough tonight. We'll do this proper, in front of everyone, where she can't squirm out the side door. And he was right. Some truths only count if they're told in a full room. Before he left that night, Harold gave me one piece of it, because he said I shouldn't walk into Sunday blind. He told me about my grandmother. Ruth, his wife of 51 years, had not simply slipped away peacefully the way I'd been told. In her last year she'd grown suspicious. She'd noticed my mother's spending, the new car, the casino talk she didn't bother hiding anymore, and she'd started asking quiet questions about where the family's help was really coming from. She'd cornered Harold one evening and said, "Somebody is keeping Linda afloat, and it isn't us. Find out who." It took him a while. He's old and the bank wasn't keen to talk to him, but Harold spent 40 years managing a cattle operations books, and he knows how to follow a number. He found me. He found 9 years of a granddaughter quietly wiring her whole margin into a hole her mother kept digging. Ruth wanted to fix it before she went, he said. She ran out of time, so she did the next best thing. He wouldn't say more than that, not yet, but he told me Ruth had spent her last clear months with a lawyer, and that whatever she'd set in motion had her signature on it and his, and that an attorney in Boulder believed it would hold. In this state, Harold said, a trust like the one Ruth and I made can be set up the way we set it, and it does what we told it to do. He stood, gathered the folder back under his arm, and paused at the door. She wasn't ashamed of you, Paige. Whatever your mother says Sunday. Your grandmother trusted you with everything. That's why she chose you. Then he was gone, and I didn't sleep at all. The day before the dinner, Harold came by the house to check on me, and I asked him the question that had haunted me my whole life. Why Megan? Why had my mother spent 30 years treating one daughter like a prize and the other like a utility? He was quiet for a while, turning his coffee cup. You have to understand how Ruth raised her, he said, and I braced, because I loved Ruth and didn't want her complicated. Ruth was a hard woman. Fair, mostly, but hard. And she had a favorite, and it wasn't your mother. It was your Uncle Danny, God rest him. Linda grew up being the one who managed things while Danny got the love. I felt the floor tilt, because I knew that role. I had lived that role. So when Linda had you, Harold went on, and you turned out steady and quiet and capable, just like she'd had to be, something in her couldn't stand it. And when Megan came along loud and needy and bright, Linda finally got to be the mother of the favorite instead of the forgotten one. She got to do for Megan what nobody did for her. He set the cup down. It's not an excuse. It's just the shape of it. I sat with that. My mother wasn't a cartoon villain twirling a mustache. She was a woman who had been the unloved load-bearing wall in her own mother's house, and instead of breaking the pattern, she'd handed it down to me and crowned my sister in her own image. The casino, Harold said, was the only place she ever felt like she might win something she hadn't had to earn by being useful. I understood her completely, and I was still done. That night I decided exactly what Sunday would be, and what it would not be. It would not be a screaming match. I had watched my mother win 1,000 screaming matches. She is a virtuoso of volume, and the moment I raised my voice, I would be handing her the role she wanted, the hysterical, ungrateful daughter, with a dozen witnesses to confirm it. So I would not give her noise. I would give her paper. Here is the asymmetry I want you to notice, because it's the whole key. My mother's only weapons were words, lies told warmly, and guilt delivered on schedule, and a story performed for relatives. My weapons were a single printed page, a screenshot in my husband's phone, and a folder in my grandfather's careful hands. She would shout. I would set down documents. She would perform. I would let the numbers be witnessed. She traded in feeling, and I would answer in fact, in front of the exact audience she'd assembled to shame me. I told Daniel the plan in the kitchen while Nora slept. I'm not going to argue with her, I said. I'm going to show up, set it on the table, and let the paper talk. He asked if I was sure I could stay calm, knowing her. I thought about every dinner I'd swallowed, every check I'd sent, every time I'd managed her feelings instead of stating a fact. I've been calm my whole life, I said. Sunday I just stopped being silent too. Those are different things, and it had taken a truck and a cast and a grandfather with a folder to teach me the difference. I packed the one printed page in Nora's diaper bag, beneath the wipes, where nobody would think to look. Megan flew back from the cruise on Saturday and called me from the airport, and the call told me everything about how little had changed in her world, while mine had been rebuilt from the studs. Okay, so the cruise was kind of ruined, she announced. Before hello. Before, are you all right? I spent the whole time stressed about my card. Do you know how embarrassing it is to get declined in front of people? I held the phone and looked at my daughter and said nothing, which she took as permission to continue. Mom said you had some meltdown and stopped the family money, which, fine, have your feelings. But I have a launch coming and I literally cannot function without the account. So can you just fix it before dinner tomorrow so we don't have to do a whole thing? Fix it before dinner. As if my near death and my newborn's abandonment were a clogged drain inconveniencing her content calendar. I asked her quietly, one question. Megan, where do you think that money comes from? There was a pause. The first real pause I'd ever heard from her. From Mom and Dad, she said. But it came out with a little upward lift at the end, a question disguised as an answer. The first crack of doubt I'd ever heard in my sister's voice. It's a family thing. I told her I'd see her tomorrow and let her work it out on her own, because some bills you have to read yourself before you'll believe them. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to find out who'd been signing her life for 9 years, in a dining room full of relatives, with no card to decline and no story left to hide behind. Sunday we drove to my parents' house, the house with the mortgage I'd believed I was paying, and I sat in the car for a moment in the driveway gathering myself. I still wore the cast, and around my wrist the hospital ID band was still cinched. 5 days old now, gone soft and gray. I'd kept it on purpose. I peeled it off in the car, finally, and tucked it into my coat pocket, because I wanted it on me, a small hard piece of proof of exactly where I'd been the night my mother chose a cat. Daniel carried Nora's car seat in his right hand, and from the curb behind us came the slow, careful tap of a cane, and there was Harold, in his Sunday flannel, the worn manila folder pinned under his arm with its brittle crossed rubber bands. He'd insisted on coming separately so my mother wouldn't see us arrive together and brace. "You ready?" he asked me on the porch. Through the front window I could see them all assembled. Aunt Carol and two of my cousins. My father in his chair. My mother moving among them, topping off coffee and playing wounded hostess, queen of a kingdom I had financed without ever being crowned in it. Megan sat on the arm of the couch scrolling her phone, sunburned, oblivious. "I'm ready," I said, and I meant it in a way I never had before. Harold pushed the door open with the head of his cane, and we walked in out of the cold. The three generations my mother least wanted in one room, carrying a baby, a cast, an ID band, and a folder. The conversation stopped. My mother turned with the coffee pot in her hand, and her welcome smile already in place, and the evening began. My mother is, I will give her this, a gifted performer. And she opened strong. She set down the coffee, pressed a hand to her chest, and crossed the room toward Nora with her eyes already glistening for the audience. "Oh, there's my grandbaby," she cooed, reaching, and Daniel angled the car seat away, gentle but immovable, and the reach turned into a flutter and then into the first act. She turned to the relatives, not to me. "I am just so relieved we're all here, because this has been the hardest week of my life." Her life. The week I spent in a hospital bed had been the hardest week of her life. She told them, voice trembling on cue, that her daughter had suffered a little accident, thank God, and had used it as an excuse to cut off her struggling parents, to abandon them in their old age out of some imagined grievance. She dabbed her eyes. Aunt Carol nodded along, though I noticed Carol wouldn't quite look at me, and I knew my 12 rows were sitting somewhere in the back of her mind. My father stared at his hands. Megan looked up from her phone, confused, sensing the script had a part for her she hadn't rehearsed. And then my mother delivered her closer. The line she'd used to win every room for 30 years, turning at last to face me with wet, wounded eyes and a voice pitched perfectly for the cheap seats. "I don't understand where this cruelty comes from. Your sister never has these emergencies." The fourth time. In that warm, crowded room, with everyone watching, she handed me the exact sentence she'd used to leave my newborn alone, and she had no idea she'd just loaded the gun and passed it to me grip first. The room waited for me to cry or shout or crumble. I did none of those things. I reached into the diaper bag under the wipes and took out one folded sheet of paper. I did not stand up and make a speech. I unfolded the single page, smoothed it flat against my thigh with my one good hand, and set it on the dining table in the middle of the room, where the light from the fixture fell on it. Then I said, in the same level voice I use to present a quarterly forecast, "You're right, Mom. Megan never has these emergencies. I'd like to show everyone why." I slid the page to the center. "This is every dollar I sent this family for the last 9 years, 486,000 of them." The room went very still. Carol leaned in despite herself. "The top rows are real. 65,000 for Dad's heart, his cardiologist, his prescriptions, 11,000 toward this mortgage." I let that sit one beat. "The rest is the part Mom tells you all she manages on her own." I touched the page lightly, not for drama, just to guide their eyes. 290,000 in cash, withdrawn over 9 years, almost all of it within 2 miles of the casino in Black Hawk. A small sound went around the room, an intake of breath, the sound of a story cracking. "And 120,000 to Megan, including 40,000 once filed under Dad's surgery, so nobody would ask about it." My sister's head came up slowly. "That's where your card money comes from, Meg," I said gently, because none of this was her fault first. It came from me. It always came from me. My mother's performance had nowhere to go. The tears she'd summoned for sympathy were now just tears on a face caught in a full room, and her hand was trembling around nothing. I looked at her, and did not raise my voice even a little. "It's handled," I said. 3 days of grief and 9 years of silence had compressed into 2 words, and they landed in that room like a gavel. My mother opened her mouth, and I watched her reach for the only tool she had left, which was to call me a liar, a thief, a dramatic, ungrateful child, to bury 12 true rows under a landslide of feeling the way she always had. She got as far as, "That is twisted. You've twisted everything. Your father and I never—" And that's when my grandfather set his cane against the table and laid the manila folder down beside my single page. The brittle rubber bands had to be coaxed off. They'd been on so long they'd left grooves. He opened it with the unhurried hands of a man who had waited a year for this exact moment, and he spoke for the first time since we'd come in that dry gravel voice that somehow filled the room more than my mother's tears ever had. I knew. I always knew. He said it to the relatives, not to Linda. Ruth knew too at the end. She had me trace it. He drew out a stapled document, thick, official, a Boulder law firm's name on the cover page. "This is your grandmother's trust and mine. Last spring, Ruth and I moved most of what we had into it. The land. This house, which sits on our parcel and always has. The accounts." He said it where everyone could see. "It does not go to Linda. Linda doesn't manage a dollar of it." He looked at my mother then, and there was no cruelty in it, only a tired, final clarity. "We left it to Paige, and to the baby. There's a fund for Nora's schooling. The rest is in trust. The way Ruth wanted. Where it can't be gambled away." He tapped the cover. "My attorney says it stands. We made good and sure it stands." My mother's face did a thing I'd never seen it do. The wounded matriarch mask simply fell off, and underneath was raw panic, because the house she was standing in, the kingdom she ruled, the story she'd told for 30 years, had just been handed in a stapled document with 2 signatures to the daughter she'd left in a hospital bed. The room did not look at me. The room looked at her. What happened next is the part people always hope will be an apology, and it never is, and I want you braced for that the way I wish I had been. My mother did not say she was sorry. She cycled through everything else first. She wept, loud and sudden, and when the room didn't soften, she pivoted to my father. "Roy, are you going to let them do this to me? This was your mess too. The surgery. All of it." My father flinched. For one moment, the same moment I'd glimpsed on the phone, he lifted his head and looked at me, and his mouth opened. And I thought, this is it.